Had it been the time that he had yet to meet with Jack, and Jack had completely defeated him, then, the virtual nightmare would have definitely been confident about his capabilities. But, ever since he was defeated, it was clear that his confidence had been shattered. Even though not completely, this time, he was doubtful that he was actually the top hacker present in the world. Even the second position was something that he was doubting about. I am an automotive engineer. And currently, I have some plans to release new types of cars into the market. But, that is something that has yet to start, and it is still in planning, Jack replied. The assistance that I want from you is simply about the calculations and so on that require your computer skills. Even though I can do that by myself, there's so much that I can do on my own, Jack continued. The virtual nightmare's eyes showed disappointment. He had been expecting that there was going to be something that was quite challenging, but he had never expected that Jack was going to give him such a simple task. Although this thing might be considered complex to other hackers, for a person like him, that was considered a stroll in the park. But the virtual nightmare did not express his disappointment. He thought to himself that it was way better than Jack trying to give him the job of going to destroy other countries. To him, without any proper reason, there was no way that he was going to attack anybody. Of course, with Jack's sharp observation skills, he was able to easily tell that the virtual nightmare had been disappointed. You are already disappointed even though you have not heard about the details of what I am planning, Jack stated with risen brows. Before the virtual nightmare could reply, Jack continued. Before you began judging about the job that I'm going to give you, I think it is better if you encounter one of it first. The moment that he completed speaking, Denali came downstairs. She had been present in the villa as she had already begun making preparations for Jack's next plans. The entertainment company was already moving in the right direction, and it would only be a matter of a few months before it finally dominated the entire entertainment industry. Of course, that was on the condition that everything progressed as it was currently. For that reason, since Jack was supposed to have 5 companies that were considered monopolies, that implied that there was no way that he was going to have 2 companies that were engaged in the same industry. For that reason, with the hotel industry already taken down, he had come to focus on the entertainment industry. But, recently, he had realized that as long as he provided enough resources, there was no need for him to get too much involved into the matter. With the top staff members that had been hired by Denali, the entertainment company wasn't going to collapse easily. And that was the reason as to why Jack had decided to shift his attention to something else. Boss, I have already made preparations. We are going to use the Future Technologies company to progress with your plans. In the presence of other people, Denali would always refer to Jack as boss. But, if there were only 2 of them, she would always refer to him as master. Jack nodded to himself. The Future Technologies was the company under him that was currently dealing with anything concerning technology. But previously, since he wasn't serious in the industry, they hadn't done anything big. They were doing simple research and so on. But this time, Jack finally thought that it was finally time for that company to make a big move. And, technology wasn't a single industry. But, this was a branch that had various industries that were related to it. And currently, since he himself was already an automotive engineer, even though he had only gotten his degree, that was just enough. He wasn't willing to go for masters or further his education. Why would he waste a lot of his time when he possessed the system? And since that was the case, Jack had decided that he was going to utilize the system. And of course, he had already found a good way that he was going to utilize the system without going at a loss. He knew that the system was going to offer emergency missions as long as he needed them. And currently, there was something that he needed from the system. Even though he was going to complete a certain mission for him to be able to possess the skill that would have been granted to him by the system, it didn't matter to him. At the end of the day, he was going to earn something more. I think you should take a look at. The virtual nightmare on the other hand couldn't help but throw a few glances at Denali. Even though it was true that he had already married, men were always men. There was no way that they were going to be able to ignore a beauty, unless they were of course abnormal. But, it was going to be their own decisions on whether to chase after her or not. Of course, the virtual nightmare was able to prevent himself from going overboard with his eyes. At the same time, he couldn't help but wonder if the decision of distributing the money that he had been rightfully reclaiming to other people was right. Had he not done something like that, then he would have perhaps been one of the richest men present in the world. After all, that was not something that he had done in only a single country. In the end, he could only shake his head to dispel the thoughts. Otherwise, he wouldn't even know how he would have fallen from the path that he had always been following. I do assume that as you were planning on attacking Azima, You should have gotten some information about the future technologies. So, what do you think about working in that company as a top programmer? Jack asked. The virtual nightmare thought about it and realized that it was true that he had received information about that company. A person like him always possessed a good memory, and for that reason, it was obvious that he had done his own research before deciding to attack. And, although he could not remember all the details about that company, at least, he knew that this company, although it possessed a lot of wealth, it wasn't making any big moves ever since it had been created. He couldn't help but subconsciously purse his lips when he thought about that company. He was someone who was always looking for competition all in and out. So, for him to go to work in a company that didn't possess any experts that could introduce new types of works, that was indeed discouraging to him. But when he thought about it, he realized how shallow his thoughts were. After all, if he was looking for competition, then the person in front of him was enough. Why was he still trying to look for others? I have no problem with that, the virtual nightmare replied. At the same time, he couldn't help but think that he would have to leave the profession that he had been pursuing for some time now. The rightful reclaimer profession. Then there we have it, Jack said as he snapped his fingers. He then looked at Denali, who went ahead and nodded. Just like always, Jack had utilized the skill that Denali possessed to make sure that the person in front of him wasn't someone that could be easily poached away. After receiving a go-ahead from her, Jack couldn't help but get ecstatic. But of course, that was something that he didn't show on his face. Instead, he began talking about the plans that he was having. Currently, I am planning to introduce new types of cars into the market. And of course, it is not going to be just a single type of car, but vehicles with different abilities and functions. What I'm going to try to do this time is to revolutionize the world. The vehicles that we are currently seeing will not be able to compare with the vehicles that I am planning to introduce. Even though this is something that is supposed to take a very long period of time to succeed, but to me, this is something that should be able to be completed within half a year. One after the other, Jack finally began revealing the plans that he was having. The maximum period of time that he had given himself to completely conquer the car industry was half a year. And the period that he had decided that he was going to visit the stronghold was also during half a year from now. With the blueprint of the anti-laser armor that was still lying within the system, he would have to get the materials from the strongholds. The more that he listened, the more surprised the virtual nightmare was. He had never expected that Jack was having such big plans. Even though he did not know about Jack's real background, it was obvious that he wasn't simple. There was a relationship that he could match Jack with, and that was the Rose Entertainment Company. During the time that the Rose Entertainment Company was being attacked was the moment that everything changed. Denali on the other hand was getting even more amazed of Jack. She had always believed that Jack was a person who possessed great capabilities. And that was the reason as to why she wasn't willing to let go of him. Even though she was just a subordinate, to her, that was enough as long as she was close to him. After the discussion, Jack finally decided to let Denali to take care of the accommodation and so on for the virtual nightmare. Since this was not his home country, then, it was obvious that he didn't have any plans of coming here just of yet. And since Jack was planning to have him work for him here, then, the virtual nightmare had to move from the country that he was in, and live in Azima. Currently, his wife was back in his home country. Since they had already come to an agreement, then, Jack decided to leave everything to Denali. As for the matter of introducing the new cars into the market, that was something that would immediately start during the following week. After the group left, Jack was just about to start typing another script when suddenly, Seline came in. Looking at her expression, Jack could immediately tell that she was angry at something. "What's wrong, darling?" Jack asked worriedly. Ever since the two of them had gotten engaged, the relationship between the two of them had gotten closer than before. Seline did not reply to him, and instead, she simply sat on the couch, placing her handbag beside her. At the same time, Jack could see that there was a hint of anger in her eyes. He couldn't help but wonder what reason would make Seline this angry. She was a person who was good at hiding her emotions. But of course, that applied mainly to outsiders and not him. But, ever since she had taken over the management of several companies, she had never been this angered. So, Jack was quite curious about what it was that made her this angry and she couldn't solve. "Humph. A certain uncle of mine is trying to make things difficult for the two of us," Seline responded. As she thought about what had happened not long ago, she couldn't help but clench her fists in fury. Jack frowned when he heard that. There was something that he will never agree to, and that was a person trying to mess with his fiancée. It was good enough that they had already been separated for several years, and now that they were together, There was no way that he was going to agree to a certain idiot trying to mess around with her. What did he do? Jack asked coldly. Even though it was true that he was angry that someone dared to mess with his girl, he was a rational person. There was no way that he was just going to storm out of the villa and kill someone without even understanding what was going on. But of course, he would always be on Seline's side. After all, if he was not on her side, then on whose side was he supposed to be? My uncle came over and said that they had already made arrangements for my marriage, and they wanted us to go back to the family, Seline replied despondently. She herself knew that Jack was already angry that someone was trying to mess with her, but she too didn't want to create trouble for Jack. But she didn't have a choice. When Jack heard her words, the anger within his heart immediately rose. The two of them had already been engaged, but there was someone else who was already trying to steal his fiancée. Then that implied that this person didn't want to live anymore. Tell me the details and I'll take care of it, Jack stated. Seline went ahead and decided to give him all the information that she possessed. It turned out that the Gravy family wasn't just any family. Instead, Seline and her parents were members of the Gravy family. This Gravy family was at the same level as the Jezda. Seline's father had gone out to try and prove his capabilities, and when he was out, that was when he met with Caitlin. The two of them fell in love, and got married later on. After that, they finally had a daughter, Seline. Although it was true that Caitlin wasn't from a good background, she was hardworking. So, with the two of them working together, they had managed to build what they were currently having with their own hands. And just today, a few people came over claiming that they were part of the main Gravy family. And, the one who was leading them was Seline's father's elder brother. I think you should take a look at. He claimed that he knew that his younger brother had already gotten a daughter, and for that reason, they had come over to fetch her so that she could be married off. They had already made several arrangements about whom she was going to marry, and for that reason, they had already arranged the wedding date, which was supposed to be 2 months from now. And to whom were they trying to marry Seline to? It was a young master of a family that was at the same level as the Gravy family and the Jezda family. Surprisingly, Seline's father, Bruce, didn't try to claim that what had been said to was wrong. Instead, he tried convincing his brother that his daughter had already fallen in love and she had been engaged to someone else. It was clear that Bruce already knew about these arrangements. But, knowing about Jack and the love that existed between him and Seline, he wasn't willing to give up on the two of them. Of course, Seline's uncle immediately refused. He said that this was an agreement that had been made years ago, and there was no way that they were going to go against it. For that reason, she had given Bruce 3 days to annul the engagement. To him, it didn't matter whom it was that Seline was engaged to, but, as long as it was not the person that they had arranged for, then, that person was not worth it. Of course, during all of this, Seline was not present. She heard all of this from her father, and she had been so infuriated that she nearly burst in anger. She couldn't believe that she had been living with her father but he had hidden such a secret from her. At this moment, she was so angry at her father that she decided to leave home. And that was the reason as to why she had come to Jack. The only person that she thought could at least come her was her fiancé, the love of her life. After getting to know everything, Jack's expression relaxed a little. But still, the anger that was still burning inside his heart had not calmed down at all. So, there's actually someone who has already been eyeing my darling. Hey, I hope that you don't make any stupid move, or I will definitely destroy you. Jack thought to himself as he went ahead and sat beside Seline. He pulled her into his embrace and tried to calm her down. You don't have to be so worked up. All of that is nothing, you know it. Seline did not resist at all. Instead, she placed her head on Jack's chest, as she complained. You don't understand at all. What we are going to face this time is not just any person, but 2 big families that can compare to the Jezda family. Jack brushed her hair, as he said in a calm voice. You should know that you are with me. Some things shouldn't trouble you at all. This is something that I am supposed to deal with, and there's definitely no way that I'm going to let someone else take you. Upon hearing his words, Seline finally began calming down as she thought about who Jack was. Even till this moment, she couldn't figure out the mysteries that were surrounding him, even though the two of them had already gotten engaged. Jack had already revealed several secrets to her, but none of them explained the reason as to why he possessed what he had now. But all the same, she didn't ask any question, as she didn't know the reason as to why Jack was not informing her about something like that. Even though she felt that perhaps Jack had a way to deal with the current situation, she couldn't help but get infuriated when she thought about the family that she didn't even know about. The thing that definitely angered her the most was the fact that her father had obviously agreed to something like this. They had actually planned her marriage even before she was born. And to make matters worse, her father didn't even inform her of this thing until she was already 20 years old, when they were coming to take her for marriage. Although it was true that he had been trying to defend the relationship between Jack and herself, that was not enough for what he had done. On the other hand, Jack had already begun thinking about the countermeasures that he was supposed to take. There was no way that he was going to allow someone to actually steal away his girl, just because of some stupid agreement that he didn't even know about. Even if it was true that Seline agreed to go back and marry that person, Jack was not going to agree to that. As long as her heart was still with him, there was no way that he was going to agree. Additionally, even if her heart was taken away by someone else, he was of course going to steal it back. That was his resolution. Inside one of Glaze Hotel's presidential suite, a young man was drinking red wine while seated on a couch. He had long black hair that reached his shoulders, and rare purple eyes. His face was also handsome, that it would throw several ladies' hearts into a frenzy. His expression was calm, but his eyes were filled with longing. At the same time, on his face, a perverted expression would appear from time to time, as he thought of someone. Once in a while, after he had taken a sip of the wine, he would smile, or sometime laugh loudly. There was excitement in his voice, as he thought about what was just going to happen next. At this moment, the door of the suite was opened, and another young man walked in. This young man was of the same age as the one that was seated on the couch. His expression was cold. After arriving in front of the young man, he spoke in a respectful voice, "Young Master Eugene, arrangements have already been made. You should be able to meet her by tomorrow the latest." Eugene finally stopped drinking the wine as he placed the glass on the table. After that, he looked at the young man in front of him, and asked in dissatisfaction, "What is actually wrong with you guys? This is something that should have taken you a very short period of time to organize. Don't you know that I'm getting impatient? We have already made the arrangements, but the members of the Gravy family that had come over are the ones that are making things difficult for us. There's no way that we can carry out the plan with them watching from the side," the young man replied. "Ruben, I don't want to believe that with the capabilities that the team that you brought possesses, you cannot arrange for something like that without catching the attention of that group," Eugene stated with narrowed eyes. Ruben felt his body tremble a little, but he managed to stabilize himself. "Young Master Eugene, it is not that we don't have the capabilities, but it is just that the group from the Gravy family is also looking for her." Eugene frowned when he heard that. He himself was also in the dark not long ago, and had just known something like this recently. He was a member of the Smith family, one that was like the Jezda family. They always did things in a low-profile manner. But even so, the reputation that they possessed wasn't to be joked about in the upper circles. He himself was a hedonistic young master. All that he thought about was to enjoy himself, and he didn't even care about the family business and so on. Were there not other people present in the family? Then let them take care of everything and let him enjoy the fruits of their labor. That was what he always thought about. Due to his hedonistic nature, he had already managed to get several girls, and of course, it was always a one-time thing, and he targeted those that were still pure. After spending a night with them, he would always give them a lot of compensation, and throw them to the side. As for the matter of any of them getting pregnant for him, that could always be solved with him giving out a few $100,000 for abortion. It was only recently that he was finally informed that they had already organized for a person that he was supposed to marry. As a hedonist, there was no way that he was going to agree to marriage. To him, marriage was no different from chains that would prevent him from enjoying his life. And for that reason, he was completely determined to refuse. But his father was adamant about it. He said that this was an agreement that had been made very long ago, and there was no way that they were going to go against it. Eugene could only give up. But at the same time, he had already begun looking for means that he could utilize to make sure that this agreement was broken. But of course, all of these plans were thrown to the side the moment that he finally realized who it was that he was supposed to marry. He was given her image, and he immediately fell in love with her at first sight. From the fact that she was a great beauty, and she was just 20 years old, as a hedonist, there was no way that he was going to resist the temptation. At that moment, he thought to himself that, even if the lady had already been defiled by another man, there was no way that he was going to give up on her. That was the reason as to why he had talked to his father so that they could make sure that the marriage would happen as soon as possible. He even wanted it to happen the following day if it was possible. "I think you should take a look at." But of course, his father was completely against it. Instead, he stated that something like that was supposed to take time. And for that reason, the two of them were going to be given 2 months to get to know each other, before they got married. To Eugene, this was just a wastage of time for him, and for that reason, he had sent someone to follow the group that was supposed to come and pick Seline. After he received the information about where she was, he hurried over. He had thought that the moment that he would come, he would be able to meet her. But in the end, he wasn't able to. He had already been getting impatient, and had wanted to meet her earlier on. In this way, perhaps he might have a chance to enjoy her even before their marriage. As a hedonist, he was completely proud about his handsome face. He didn't believe that the other party wouldn't fall for him the moment that they saw his face. Even if his face did not work, he did not believe that he would not manage to win her over. After all, he had already chased after many girls and had managed to succeed. And for that reason, he believed that the seduction skills that he possessed were top-notch. He really couldn't resist the temptation after seeing her face. Although he didn't see her, and neither did he know about her character, he didn't believe that anyone who was supposed to marry him was going to be a loose person. Damn it. Let's get out of here. I want to look around the capital city. I have never been out of Summer City since I was born. I can as well take this chance to look at the beauties that the capital city possesses. Eugene stated as he got to his feet, before stretching for a while, then headed for the door. Ruben could only shake his head. This guy was actually here to see the person that he was supposed to marry, but he had not even given up on chasing other girls. He couldn't help but pity the girl that was supposed to marry him. All the same, he decided to follow him out of the place. He was his aide after all, and had always been trained by the Smith family to make sure that he was going to be of assistance in the future. Since Celine's mood had been ruined, Jack decided to take her out. In fact, she hadn't even eaten her lunch. And for that reason, he decided that they could spend the whole day trying to make sure that her emotions were calm. This time, he didn't leave the villa with a car. Instead, he used the motorbike that he had recently bought, a BMW R1250 GS Adventure, bought at the price of $21,400, customized to his liking. Jack got onto the bike, and Seline sat behind him, using her arms to wrap around Jack's waist. With everything said, Jack immediately rode the bike out of the Serenity residential area. It wasn't something hard for him to do, as he had already done something like that before. Even though he was not an expert in riding motorbikes, still, his skills were not to be underestimated. After they left the Serenity residential area, Jack began by visiting a restaurant. The two of them treated themselves to seafood. After that, they began chatting while strolling around the city. On the bike, the two of them were able to view their surroundings well. So, Jack didn't ride the bike at a high speed, but just at a low speed, enough for him and Seline to look around. And of course, he was not riding at the center of the city, but at the outskirts of the city. It was at these areas that there were several parks and so on. In the end, Jack went ahead and parked the motorbike in front of a mall, Destiny. Since they had already gotten enough of moving around the city, Jack thought that it was good to make sure that the stress that was in Celine's mind could be taken away by doing some simple shopping. Get out of the way. Just as they were about to enter the mall, someone shouted from behind them. Of course, Jack and Seline completely ignored them, as they continued forward in each other's arms. You dare to ignore this young master? It seems that this capital city doesn't have someone to educate some arrogant youths like you. When the other person saw that they were not reacting at all, he spoke in an angry voice. You dare to ignore this young master? It seems that this capital city doesn't have someone to educate some arrogant youths like you. When the other person saw that they were not reacting at all, he spoke in an angry voice. Eugene was a hedonist young master. And as a result, whenever he saw two young people together, he would of course feel uncomfortable. The main reason as to why he had spoken in that way previously was simply because, from behind, he could see Celine's figure. Her figure was so good, that Eugene wanted to get her immediately. But currently, she was in another man's arms. This had irritated him. Due to the dissatisfaction in his heart, he couldn't help but vent out in such a manner. After all, how could an entrance to the mall be small? There was a very big space on the side that he could have utilized, but he simply wanted the two of them to get out of his way. But all the same, he had never expected that there was someone who was going to ignore him that way. He had never left Summer City, and for that reason, he was well known within the city. Due to that fact, he had already gotten used to doing as he pleased. After he said those words, he immediately went ahead and stretched his hand to grab the lady. He didn't like touching men, as that was the duty of his subordinates. Even though he believed that the lady in front of him had already been taken by another man, he could still satisfy his vanity by touching her. Of course, he He didn't care if this was a public area or not. But just as his hand was about to reach the target, it was suddenly grabbed in a firm hold. Eugene was at first stunned, but in the next moment, the pain that he was feeling in his hand brought him back to the reality. Not only was he feeling pain, but he was angered that there was actually a man that had dared to lay his hand on him. He shifted his gaze from the lady in front of him and turned to look at the person that had grabbed him. The next moment, he was forced to blink several times as he couldn't believe what he was seeing. He had always believed that he was the most handsome young man of his generation. But right now, in front of him, there was yet another young man who seemed to be of the same age as him, who was actually more handsome than him. The unique silver hair and the blue eyes that were staring back at him coldly, as well as the handsome face that looked like an artistic sculpture. This was the first time that Eugene had encountered someone who was just this handsome. An envious feeling began emerging in his heart. Although he was a hedonistic young master, he was also a narcissist, and for that reason, there was no way that he was going to agree to be in the same place as a person who was more handsome than him. After all, if there was a person who had better looks than him, how was he going to be praised by others? Was he only supposed to depend on his seduction skills to get the girls? That was completely unacceptable. And the person who was in front of him was actually the person that had made him uncomfortable. After all, how could he possess a woman who had a better figure than the ones that he had ever been with before? Crack. Eugene was forced to come back to his senses the moment that the bones of his hand began cracking. At this moment, Jack had already began exerting a lot of pressure on the hand. There were some things that he could agree, but there were some things that were completely intolerable to him. He had brought Seline out because he wanted to calm her down. But now, there was actually someone who was trying to take advantage of her. Wasn't this person just tired of living? Arg! Young Master Eugene wailed in both anger and pain. At the same time, he looked at the subordinates that were completely stunned behind him as he shouted, "What are you still waiting for? Take him down for me." It was only at this moment that Ruben and the other 3 people that had accompanied Eugene reacted. They too had been completely stunned as this was the first time that they had seen Eugene in such a predicament. At this moment, anger was already blessing in their eyes as they hurriedly charged towards Jack. "Presumptuous! How dare you lay your hand on young Master Eugene?" one of the bulky men shouted. The next moment, he threw a punch towards Jack. He was a person that had trained kickboxing for a very long time. He had just recently retired and had been hired as a bodyguard for young Master Eugene. He knew the Smith family all too well. They were a family that would punish anybody that failed in their duties. Since young Master Eugene was being hurt while he was being on duty, then he was bound to be punished. That was of course something that he wouldn't agree because the punishment that was given out by the Smith family was not easy to handle. Jack on the other hand was calm. He hadn't said any word all this while. He was just standing in front of Seline, ready to start dealing with these idiots. "I think you should take a look at." When he saw that a punch was heading his way, he could only sigh to himself. He had been lucky not to encounter such stupid young masters for a very long time now. But how could he be unlucky to encounter one at this moment? All the same, with a simple movement of his hand, he pulled Eugene as if he was pulling a piece of paper. In the next moment, he threw Eugene in the trajectory of the punch that had been thrown by the bulky bodyguard. Both Eugene and the bodyguard widened their eyes in disbelief. The bulky bodyguard could not stop the punch as he had thrown it furiously and with all of his strength. On the other hand, Eugene was in the air and could not evade at all. As such, the punch squarely landed on his stomach. Bang! Blair! Eugene's eyes widened due to the immense pain that he was feeling. At the same time, he was blown backwards and landed on the ground heavily. As for the perpetrator, Jack had simply moved to the side to give way for the express truck. Ruben and the remaining 2 bodyguards couldn't believe what had just happened. They remained frozen for a while before they finally reacted. While Ruben dashed toward Eugene, who was still wailing on the ground, the remaining 2 bodyguards immediately went ahead to attack Jack. This group of people had already gotten used to acting notoriously back in Summer City. Even though they had gotten out of Summer City, they had not changed their character at all. Just as the 2 of them were about to arrive in front of Jack, they suddenly heard someone shouting towards them. "Police! Stop it right there!" It was only at this moment that the 2 bodyguards finally remembered that they were not in Summer City. And for that reason, their influence here was quite low. Since the police had already decided to interfere in the matter, they had no choice but to temporarily give up on the matter. But of course, after the police were gone, they were planning to deal with Jack. They didn't care about how Jack was able to easily throw Eugene in the path of the punch, because they only cared about their own lives. Since the young master of the Smith family had been injured, it was obvious that they were going to face some repercussions back at Summer City. Jack and Seline on the other hand were calm. Even if Jack had not acted, Seline could have already taken care of them easily. As for her bodyguard Samantha, since the two of them had decided to spend their time together, of course they were not going to bring a third wheel alongside them. What is going on here? A male police officer questioned as he looked at the bulky men. At this moment, Eugene was still struggling to get back on his feet. The power of the punch that he had received was not to be underestimated at all. Although he had managed to crawl back to his feet with the assistance of Ruben, the pain that he was still undergoing made him to continuously twist his body. When the male police officer realized that none of the people present were responding to him, he couldn't help but furrow his brows. I asked a question. What the hell is going on here? He asked somehow angrily as he looked at the two groups. A crowd had already begun forming, because this was not something that they could see often. Although some of them didn't even know what was happening here, they were still curious about what was going to happen next. Officer, he is the one who attacked our young master. At this moment, Ruben pointed towards Jack as he said. Is that true? The police officer asked as he looked at Jack. Although he could see that the two sides were at a standoff, he didn't have any evidence that proved that what the other party said was right. Additionally, he couldn't help but think to himself that, wasn't the young master having 3 bodyguards? How is it possible that he had been hit? And when he was coming over, he had seen when 2 of them were actually trying to attack the young man. He had already experienced some cases where these rich young people bullied others. Since he was also from a small background, he of course hated this kind of arrogant and self-centered people. Had it not been for the fact that he did not possess the capabilities to deal with them, he would have definitely slapped Eugene and the group. Why don't you look at the CCTV footage of the mall? Jack questioned in a calm tone. Why don't you look at the CCTV footage of the mall? Jack questioned in a calm tone. The moment that his voice fell, there was silence in the area. At the same time, Ruben, who was the smartest amongst the group, began thinking about it. The police officer began observing both parties. He wanted to detect if there was any person that was going to act in a guilty manner. After some thought, Ruben came into a conclusion. All this while, Jack had not even attacked. And for that reason, if they went to look at the CCTV footage, they would find out that it was Eugene who made the first move. At the same time, although it was true that Jack had held Eugene's hand, there was no proof that he was actually holding it tightly. And when he pushed Eugene to the side, that could be easily interpreted as him being scared of the attack that was about to land on him. And since he was not the person who had landed the punch on Eugene, it could be said that he was the victim here. Well, when Ruben thought about it carefully, it was true that Jack and his girl were actually the victims. Officer, there's nothing going on here. Just forget about it, will you? Ruben smiled as he looked at the officer. He didn't want this case to go further, because they were currently in another family's territory. Their influence here was very limited, and as a result, it was going to be a very difficult task for them to get out of the police if this thing progressed further. Eugene couldn't believe what he had just heard. This was actually the first time that he had seen Ruben trying to talk to a small police officer in such a respectful manner. He was just about to retort him when suddenly Ruben whispered in his ears, "Young master, our influence here is limited. So, we can simply forget about this for the moment, and deal with him later." Upon hearing that, Eugene finally managed to suppress the anger that he was feeling. But all the same, he decided to look at the 2 that had caused him this pain, to make sure that he remembered them. But the moment that his eyes landed on the lady, they widened in surprise and disbelief. At the same time, the anger that he had been trying to suppress all this while almost erupted. What the FCK? He couldn't help but shout a profanity. He could not believe that the lady that he was supposed to marry was actually out with another man. He could accept this if it was just another beautiful lady with another man as her boyfriend. But, there was no way that he was going to agree to his marriage partner to be with another man. And, that man just happened to be more handsome than him. And from the way that the 2 were acting so intimate, it was obvious that their relationship was not simple. The officer on the other hand felt the chilling gaze that he was receiving from Ruben. Although it was true that Ruben was young, from the way that he was carrying himself, it was obvious that the background that he belonged to was not simple. Even though it was true that he hated this kind of young master, there was nothing that the police officer could do. Although he wanted to follow up on the matter, he knew that these people would easily use their influence to make things difficult for him. In the end, he could only suppress the dissatisfaction in his heart, as he said, "Since there's no damage dealt on either of you, let this matter end here. And, you have to remember that street fights are prohibited by the law of the country. Those who break this rule will be arrested." After he finished his words, he didn't continue staying there. He immediately decided to leave as he didn't want to continue facing the arrogant young master. When Eugene heard the words that both parties had not been dealt damage to, he was about to burst in anger. How can it be that there was no damage to either parties when he was actually suffering from the blow that he had received previously? Since the matter had already ended, Jack decided to let go. Although it was true that he was currently part of the military, he didn't want to continue wasting the time that he was supposed to spend with Seline on such a useless young master. So, he wrapped his hand around Celine's waist, before the two of them began heading into the mall. They had not given up on the matter of shopping yet. When Eugene saw that Jack was actually laying his hand on Seline, he was infuriated that he passed out. Ruben hurriedly held him to prevent him from falling down. After that, they had no choice but to end the trip that they had decided to take out, and go back to their lodging area. At the same time, after they got into the car, Ruben immediately contacted someone to begin investigating the two people. He himself didn't know about Celine's appearance. "I think you should take a look at." And for that reason, he didn't know that the reason as to why Eugene was so angry at that moment was due to the fact that the girl that he was supposed to marry was actually out with another man. Anyways, had he known about it, he would have thought to himself that this was actually karma. But still, he had to do the duties that were assigned to him properly. He knew that the moment that Eugene was going to regain his consciousness, he was definitely going to ask for the information about the two of them. And for that reason, he had asked the subordinate that he had called to make sure that the information was brought within 2 hours. Even though it was true that the Smith family didn't possess much influence in the capital city, but it was also true that they still possessed some influence. And for that reason, he didn't believe that it was going to be a difficult task to find out information about two ordinary people. A few hours later, Eugene finally woke up. This was not the first time that he had lost his consciousness. Instead, he had always been doing something like this because he was suffering from blood pressure and vasovagal syncope. This was actually the main reason as to why Eugene was a hedonist. He believed that, since his life was not a sure bet, then he might as well enjoy it before it suddenly ended. When he woke up, there was still anger in his eyes. Even though it was true that he had just regained his consciousness at this moment, he could still clearly remember the scene that had happened before he passed out. "Ruben, tell me who that man is," Eugene stated after waking up. His anger was already flaring up, just waiting for the target. Although Ruben was surprised that Eugene only wanted information on the man, he still went ahead and gave it. "Young master, we have already done some investigations, but we have not managed to find much about him. We only know that he stays in Serenity residential area. But as for what he does or what family he belongs to, we aren't sure of, as of now. But still, there is an interaction between him and the heir of the Jezda family. And from the way that they look alike, I guess that that guy has some links to the Jezda family." The Jezda family, the Smith family, and the Gravy family had already interacted several times. There were several events that were attended by the young generations of both families. During those events, they had obviously interacted with each other. And for that reason, Ruben had come to know of Jonathan. He was the most promising candidate of the Jezda family. During the moment that they had clashed with Jack, he had actually gotten a feeling that he might actually be the young master of the Jezda family. But even so, he wasn't afraid. After all, the two families were at the same level. If Jonathan provoked them, then it was obvious that they had to retaliate. That was the reason as to why he did not prevent the bodyguards from attacking. As for Eugene, that guy didn't even care about the other young masters. And for that reason, he didn't even remember who Jonathan was. In his mind, he could only remember about the beautiful young ladies, and that was all. Just to make sure, Ruben had still carried out some investigation, and in the end, he came to a realization that there were actually two people that looked alike. Although there was an interaction between Jack and Jonathan, he didn't find anything that could threaten them on Jack. Other than the relationship between him and Jonathan, Ruben didn't believe that Jack had any background. As for looking alike, he could only say that this was a coincidence. After all, he didn't believe that the Jezda family was going to allow a member of their family to freely roam outside. If that is the case, then contact the people from the Gravy family that had come over. Tell them that I want to meet my fiancée. Eugene spoke after thinking for a moment. At this moment, he had already begun thinking about getting Seline. He wasn't ready to start dealing with Jack just yet. He had to ensure that Seline was his first, before he could deal with Jack. After all, who knew what was going on between the two of them at this moment? Just thinking of this fact immediately made Eugene angered that he nearly passed out again. Ruben immediately acted. He could finally understand the anger that Eugene was experiencing. After all, he had just seen the person that he was supposed to marry, going out with another man, showing their affection publicly. Back at Seline's house, a group of people had come to visit. This time, they had requested for Bruce and Caitlin to be present. This group was none other than the group that had been sent from the main Gravy family to come and pick Seline for marriage. When they came over, they had come with Eugene in his group. Eugene had insisted that he wanted to see Seline. Bruce's elder brother was Collins. The moment that they arrived, they were welcomed as usual. But still, the air was not filled with harmony because the two sides were in disagreement. "Brother, I thought that you gave me 3 days? It has only been a day and yet you are already back," Bruce stated as he looked at Collins. To say the truth, during the time that the agreement for marriage had been made, he didn't care. But only after he got his daughter, that was the moment that he began getting worried about the agreement. This was especially so during the time that he came to a realization that Seline had fallen in love with someone. And the two of them had already gotten engaged. He would have definitely prevented it if the two of them were not in love. But the two of them reminded him of himself and Caitlin. Since he was given a chance, then why was he supposed to deny his daughter? During the past day, he had always been trying to look for means that he was going to utilize to convince his brother not to ruin his daughter's happiness. He was willing to do anything, but he had yet to come into a resolution. "Humph. Do you take me for a fool? I told you that the engagement between the two of them should be immediately annulled. But what did you do? You didn't even tell her that she is supposed to marry someone else. And you let the two of them continue strolling outside, showing everyone that the two of them were together." Collins scoffed as he said. At this moment, he was completely angry. He had actually given Bruce 3 days because he cared about his younger brother. But the appearance of Eugene had changed everything. The Gravy family and the Smith family had an agreement several years ago. They were going to form a cooperation, and this cooperation was going to be brought together by marriage. And for that reason, there was no way that they were going to agree to let Seline go. The Gravy family itself was eyeing something from the Smith family. And for that reason, the cooperation between the two families was a must-do for them. Bruce frowned. He had previously informed Seline about this, to tell her to keep it low. Since his brother was here, he didn't want the relationship between the two of them to be exposed that deeply. Although the two of them had been engaged, he had to look for ways to deal with his brother first. After all, the Gravy family wasn't something that could be joked with. Although it was true that he knew that Jack had some relationship with the Jezda family, would the Jezda family continue supporting him the moment that they realized that two families of the same level as them were about to clash with them? When Collins saw that his brother was not replying, he could immediately guess what his brother was thinking. He simply snorted before asking, "Where is she?" Bruce remained silent. He knew that Seline hadn't slept over yesterday, and since that was the case, it was obvious that she had stayed at Jack's villa. But there was no way that he was going to tell his brother about that. Otherwise, wasn't that akin to telling him that he was supposed to make his moves this early? When Collins saw this, he frowned again. At this moment, his dissatisfaction increased. Since he had been in the family for all this while, he knew about the situation that the family was facing. And for that reason, he knew how important the marriage between the two families was. He was just about to tell one of his subordinates to go and look for her, when the door was opened. This attracted the attention of everyone present. They looked over and saw that Seline had just come in. Just before Collins could begin scolding her, his eyes narrowed when he noticed that there was actually another person behind her. The moment that Eugene saw him, the anger within his eyes blazed again. He was reminded of what happened the previous day. Not only did Jack take away the girl that he was supposed to marry, but he had also caused him to be beaten up by his own bodyguard. Although he was completely angry at this moment, he still managed to restrain himself. After all, he didn't want to deal with this situation himself. He was going to let her family deal with it. "Who are you?" Collins got to his feet as he approached the door. Then, he asked as he looked at Jack. "I think you should take a look at." "Who are you?" Jack questioned back. To him, it didn't matter about the identity of the person in front of him. But, he could of course guess about what was going on considering the number of people that was present here. When Collins heard that question, he was infuriated. as the one that was supposed to take charge of the Gravy family in the future. He had never been talked to in such a way by a person of a younger generation. He was so furious that he was about to begin lashing at Jack when suddenly, Bruce cut him in. "Jack, what are you doing here?" Bruce asked worriedly. He had not expected that Jack was going to come over at such a moment. "Oh, so you're Jack. Let me give you an advice, you better turn around and leave this place right now, and forget about Seline." Collins finally got an understanding about who Jack was. So, he immediately waved his hand, trying to chase Jack away. Jack of course completely ignored him. Instead, he looked at Bruce and questioned with a smile, "Am I supposed not to come to my father's house?" "Jack, forget about him. Come here and sit next to me." Caitlin didn't care about the Gravy family. Since this was something concerning her daughter, then she believed that she was the person to make the decisions. They had been hustling by themselves all this while, trying to make sure that they reached the top. They had gotten a daughter, but suddenly out of nowhere, there was someone who was coming over to decide about her daughter's future. How was she going to agree to that? Jack smiled as he pulled Seline into the living room, completely ignoring Collins that was already fuming as he looked at Caitlin. "Bruce, what kind of wife and idiot did you select? Look, your wife is completely ignoring me, while the idiot that you are trying to support to marry your daughter is actually this rude to his seniors," Collins stated as he looked at Bruce angrily. Bruce on the other hand remained silent. At this moment, there was no way that he was going to be on his brother's side concerning his daughter. He knew his wife all too well. If she was angered, then she was not going to care whether Collins was his brother or not. She would simply go ahead and slap him for trying to make decisions for her own daughter. Collins was already lucky that her temper had not flared up recently. Additionally, he also knew that the relationship between Jack and Seline wasn't something that they were supposed to interfere with. Although he was being called an idiot, Jack decided to remain silent. Although he was silent, that didn't mean that he was going to forgive him for calling him an idiot. It was just that, this was not the right time to deal with him. After sitting next to Caitlin, he pulled Seline and she sat next to him. To prove that the two of them were not going to care about the opinions of others, he pulled Seline into his embrace. Although Seline was startled, she still cooperated. She herself was already angered at the fact that there was actually someone going to decide about her future. And if there was a chance for her to get back at them, then she was going to use it. And for that reason, she snuggled closer to Jack. Jack smiled in satisfaction as he brushed her hair. When this happened, there was a pin-drop silence in the room. Of course, this was just a calm before the storm. "How dare you? Get your filthy hands off of her." Not able to hold back anymore, Eugene shouted. He had already been holding back during this time, but there was no way that he was going to sit back and watch the two of them continue displaying their public affection. "Tell me which family you belong to, and I am going to make sure that I deal with you and that family of yours. Otherwise, I'm going to make sure that you disappear," Collins stated as he looked at Jack with reddened eyes. His heartbeat had already increased the moment that he saw what the two of them were doing. The future of his family was actually depending on the marriage between Seline and Eugene. But now, in front of Eugene, she was actually in another man's arms. How was he supposed to explain the situation now? He didn't even know that they had already met previously. Jack on the other hand remained silent, as he completely ignored the barking dogs. The reason as to why he had come over today was to simply deal with this matter. There was no way that he was going to agree to see Seline in a depressed mood every day. For that reason, he wanted to deal with this group. Additionally, he had to get to know whom it was that he was supposed to deal with. But there was one thing that he had never expected. That was the fact that the idiot that had tried causing trouble for them was the one that was supposed to marry Seline. From his actions the previous day, it was obvious that he was not a good person. He was kind of perverted, and that was the reason as to why he had actually tried getting hold of Seline. Just thinking of the fact that there was actually someone trying to force Seline to be married by a scumbag, Jack was even more infuriated. Even though it was true that he was not going to allow her to be married to another person, even if that person was a saint, just the fact that there was someone with the thoughts of handing her over to someone like that, it was unforgivable. But still, he didn't speak. There was no need for him to say many useless words, when he could simply express his stance by actions. And for that reason, he took out his phone and texted Denali. He asked her to be ready to take action the moment that he gave her a go-ahead. He wasn't worried about the fact that he was just going to inform her of the target, because he completely trusted the skills that she possessed. When they saw that Jack did not react to their words, Eugene was just about to charge forward and beat him up when suddenly, Bruce stood in his way. Collins looked at him with a frown on his face. What is the meaning of this, Bruce? In the family, if there was anyone that was looking forward to the marriage between the two families other than anybody else was obviously Collins. Since he was the one who was going to take over the position of the family head in the future, then, he was looking forward to the prosperity of the family. The only reason as to why he had given Bruce 3 days to annul the engagement between Seline and Jack was simply because he cared about his younger brother. But now, the way that things were progressing, he could only go ahead with what he was planning, and disregard his brother. He could only ask for forgiveness after all of this was done. I'm sorry, brother. But there is no way that I'm going to allow you to get involved in my daughter's happiness. I left the family, and I haven't depended on it for several decades now, Bruce began. My daughter on the other hand hasn't depended on anything that belongs to the Gravy family. And for that reason, I believe that the main family doesn't have any authority to decide on her future. I as her father has already decided that she is going to marry the person that she likes, and not the one that you decide on. At this moment, Bruce expressed his stance. Even though he knew that all of this was going to lead to another trouble coming his way, he didn't care. Why was he supposed to give away his daughter, to be married by a person that she didn't even love, and how was he supposed to believe that the person that was supposed to marry her was going to treat her well after marriage? Just by looking at Eugene, he was able to tell that this young man was definitely one of those that had been spoiled to the core. For that reason, even if Jack was poor, he was willing to give him his daughter, rather than giving his daughter to a rich and spoiled young master. Collins's eyes widened in surprise. He looked at his younger brother as if he was looking at an alien. Ever since the two of them were young, Bruce had always been listening to him. That was the reason as to why he had a soft spot in his heart for him. But now, this was going to be the first time that Bruce was going to go against his wishes. He couldn't believe that the bond that they had shared had weakened after separating for a very long time. Bruce, do you know what you're talking about? This is something important. It was an agreement between the previous 2 generations of the Gravy and Smith family. This is not something that you can decide on, because this agreement has to be carried out. Collins stated as he looked at Bruce. I think you should take a look at. The agreement between people who are already dead doesn't concern me and my daughter. They are dead, then they should remain dead. Why should they continue affecting the happiness of my daughter when they are already dead? At this moment, Bruce didn't care about the Gravy family anymore. Collins was left speechless when he heard that. He couldn't believe that this was his always obedient younger brother. How had he changed this way? At the thought of this, Collins turned his head and looked at Caitlin, who was just seated there, completely ignoring them. Additionally, she even ignored that the 2 people sitting beside her were actually acting intimate. It must be this B*TCH that made you change. I have decided, this time, I am taking you back home. And with you, I am also taking my niece. As for your wife, you can forget about her. There's no way that I'm going to agree to the marriage between the 2 of you. She doesn't deserve you. You're going to divorce her, Collins stated angrily. This time, as he made the decisions, he didn't even consider whether Bruce was going to agree with this or not. He was going to use his power as the future family head to make the decisions. But there was just a single mistake that he had made. And that was the fact that in his words, he had completely offended Caitlin. All this while, she had remained silent. She didn't want to get involved in the matter, as long as these people decided to keep her daughter out of it. But now, it was not just a matter of her daughter, but there was actually someone who was trying to get involved in the marriage between her and her husband. Wasn't this just a joke? Caitlin rose to her feet and strode towards Collins. The moment that she arrived in front of him, she raised her hand and slapped him seriously on the face. Just as Collins was still trying to process what had happened, Caitlin spoke. I don't care whether you are my husband's brother. And I don't care whether you are a member of the Gravy family. But, I will tell you one thing. Just as this family has never gotten involved in anything concerning your family, I hope that you don't dip your nose in the matters concerning my family. Whom are you to make decisions on something concerning me and my daughter? I have never depended on you, and I don't want you involved in anything concerning my daughter. I bore the pain to bring her to this world, and I alone am eligible to make decisions concerning her. Caitlin spoke continuously. At this moment, she had already flared up. With the dissatisfaction that there was a person that was trying to decide on her daughter's future, and to add to the fact that the person had also insulted her, there was no way that Caitlin was going to agree to that. After she was done with her piece, she went back to her seat. After that, she said, all of you are not welcomed here. I hope that you can leave, or I will be calling the police that you are trespassing." Silence dominated the entire room. Even Jack had completely been surprised by Caitlin. In the memories of her during the time that he was growing up, he had never seen her angry. This was the first time. At that moment, Jack made a mental note that he was not supposed to make her angry, otherwise, wasn't he going to eat a dirty slap on his face? Rage was burning in Colin's heart. Ever since he had been appointed as the future family head of the Gravy family, he had never been hit, and neither had he ever been scolded by anyone. But this time, not only had he been hit, but he had even been scolded by a woman that was supposedly younger than him. And all of that happened in front of many people. And amongst these people, there were those that were his subordinates. Just thinking about the face that he had lost, Collins couldn't take this anymore. He looked at one of the men and said, "Bring them in. I don't care, but we are taking the two of them with us now." At this moment, since words could not work, then he was going to use force. To him, it didn't matter if this was their territory or not. And he didn't care who Jack was. All the same, he had decided that he had to accomplish what brought him here either way. Even if his brother was going to resent him in the future, he didn't care. After all, he had tried being polite, but that didn't work. His brother had already become rebellious, and he had to be brought back to the family to be taught once again. The person that had been instructed immediately got to his feet. He nodded his head and was just about to call someone when suddenly, Jack spoke. "If you are trying to contact the group of people that you had left outside, then just forget about it. They won't be coming in at all," Jack stated. "If you are trying to contact the group of people that you had left outside, then just forget about it. They won't be coming in at all," Jack stated. During the time that the two of them were coming in, they managed to find out that there was a group of people that was hiding in several corners of the residential district. And what Jack found most suspicious was the fact that all of them were hiding closer to Seline's house. Since he didn't like hidden dangers, he decided to take care of them. And the moment that they got inside the house, he encountered Collins, Eugene, and the others. And now that he was seeing the expression that was on Collins' face, he immediately knew that Collins was going to try and utilize the group of people that he had brought along with him. "What do you mean by that? No, how did you know that there were people outside?" Collins was completely stunned when he heard Jack's words. "What do you mean by how did I know? It is not like I am blind not to see a group of people outside the house when I was coming in, right?" Jack replied nonchalantly. At this moment, Collins couldn't believe it. The group that he had brought along was well trained. In fact, all of them had once been part of the military, before they retired from the military and came to work for them. So, there was no way that he was going to believe that there was an ordinary person that could easily find them if they didn't want to be seen by anyone. But, before he entered, he had instructed them that they had to stay hidden until the moment that he needed them. The guy who was supposed to contact them continued, completely ignoring what Jack had said, and made a call. But, even though the call went through, there was no response from the other end. It was only at this moment that Collins and the others began believing what Jack had said. Collins immediately instructed one of the men that he had come into the house with, to go and confirm. While the bodyguard rushed out, Collins looked at Jack with a vicious gaze. "I don't care what it is that you did, but I will repeat myself again. I am taking her away, and I'm also taking him away." As he spoke, he pointed towards Seline and Bruce. "Brother, you're getting overboard this time. Although it is true that you are the next leader of the family, that doesn't give you the authority to decide on where I will stay. As long as I don't break the family rules, then, I am free to do anything, and to stay anywhere," Bruce stated with a frown in his face. He didn't doubt Jack's words about the fact that he had already taken care of the group that was outside. Considering that he himself had already taken the body-strengthening solution, even if he faced this group in front of him, he was confident that he would be capable of dealing with them. Colin's eyes blazed with anger as he looked at Bruce. He couldn't believe that Bruce had become rebellious all of a sudden. At the same time, he began regretting the fact that he had allowed Bruce to leave Summer City. Additionally, at this moment, he had already decided that the marriage between him and Caitlin had to be cancelled. There was no way that he was going to allow a person that had slapped him in the face to be in the same family as him. Even if the family rules did not prevent her, he was going to use all means possible to make sure that she wasn't going to be a member of the Gravy family anymore. As for Eugene, he had already felt that the blood pressure had already began increasing. The more that he stared at Jack and Seline, the more angered he became. After about 5 minutes, the bodyguard that they had sent outside came back. His expression was quite strange. "Tell me, what is the situation?" Collins asked. All of them were knocked out. The bodyguard replied as he scratched his head. He himself couldn't understand how this group of experts had suddenly been taken out, and there was no resistance at all. He could see that, in the area that they were in, there was no signs of a fierce fight at all. In other words, the moment that the group outside came into contact with the other party, they were easily knocked out, without being given a chance of retaliation. Collins was stunned. Although it was true that he had been expecting this response, it was completely different after they had confirmed it. He looked at Jack, who was still holding Seline in his embrace, caressing her hair nonchalantly. "I think you should take a look at." You, what did you do to them?" Collins pointed at Jack as he questioned. "I don't think I am obliged to respond to you, right?" Jack asked back with a raised brow. Collins began breathing heavily, as he felt that he was going to burst in anger. Had it not been for the fact that he was a rational person, he would have definitely charged towards Jack and beat him up. At this moment, he had already realized that there was no way that he was going to bring Bruce and Seline with him by force. For there to be a person or a group of people that was capable of dealing with the team that he had brought along, it was obvious that they were at a disadvantage. Considering the fact that they were not in their own territory, then, there was no much that they could do. But still, Collins was not willing to give up. And for that reason, he had decided that he was going to look for other means to deal with this, after they had left. "Okay then. Let us see how long you're going to behave this arrogantly," Collins said to Jack. After that, he looked at Bruce and said, "And for you, it seems that you have already forgotten about the family teachings. I hope that you will maintain your stance after I tell father about this issue." The moment that he completed his line, he decided to leave. His subordinates followed behind, dragging the angry Eugene, Ruben and his other subordinates along. He had decided to retreat at this moment, because he knew that they had to make other plans so that they could get what they wanted. There was no way that he was going to allow the marriage agreement that was supposed to happen, to be completely ignored. To him, it didn't matter if Seline was his daughter or not, since she was a member of the Gravy family, then he believed that, she was supposed to follow his instructions. As Bruce watched as his brother left, he felt somehow conflicted. Ever since they were young, the two of them had always shared a good relationship. Since they were in a family that was full of schemes, they had always depended on each other. It was only after it was confirmed that Collins was the one that was going to take the position of the family head, that Bruce decided to get out and see the world. And at this moment, although it was true that he was quite angry at his brother, there was nothing that he could do. He knew about the family, and he knew about his father as well. Currently, he had already began getting worried. It was not about Collins, but about his father. His father was the current family head of the Gravy family. If he decided to make the moves personally, then, he wasn't even sure if the Jezda family was going to agree to take their side. "Father, don't worry about them. Jack has already told me that he is planning to take care of everything. The two of us have already gotten engaged, and I'm already considered a halfway wife to him." At this moment, the silent Seline finally spoke. Jack had already assured her that there was nothing that was going to happen, and for that reason, due to the faith and trust that she had in him, she believed that he was going to fulfill the promise that he had made. Considering that she had been involved in his business several times, she had already seen his capabilities, and for that reason, she knew that even Jonathan, who was supposedly the next leader of the Jezda family, was quite dependent on Jack. Bruce looked at Jack, and at Seline, who was currently lying on his lap, and could only shake his head, to try and dispel the worry in his heart. At the same time, he hoped that the relationship between the two of them would not be disrupted. He himself knew about the Gravy family, and at the same time, he knew how vicious the family could be. And even though he was his father, he knew that the family head was one of the most vicious members of the Gravy family. Since the marriage between the two families was important to the family, he was sure that his father was going to utilize all means, whether good or bad, to make sure that it happened. "I hope that is the case," Bruce muttered in a low voice. All the same, he was still worried about them. "Just calm down. In this short period, I have already witnessed the capabilities that Jack possesses. And for that reason, I believe that if he says that he can do something, then he definitely can." At this moment, Caitlin spoke in an unbothered manner. On the other side, Eugene had already began making a fuss about the matter. He looked at Collins, completely disregarding that he was the future family head of the Gravy family, and began chiding. "What the heck is this? You are actually telling me that you completely ignored my wife-to-be, and let her even get engaged to another man? Do you believe that I can tell my father to cancel this marriage?" Eugene shouted in anger. Even though he was a hedonist, that didn't mean that he was dumb. So, he had already known that his family was the one at an advantage. And for that reason, he didn't even care whether Collins was angry or not. All that he cared was that his anger was vented. Collins had already been fuming at this moment, so when he was being berated by Eugene, the anger within his heart immediately exploded. Stop talking as if you have been keeping to yourself all this while. You have already created a reputation for yourself as a hedonist young master in Summer City. What do you have to say about my niece having only a single man? At this moment, he had completely forgotten about the fact that his family was the one that was going to benefit the most after the corporation of the two families. Eugene, on the other hand, wasn't going to back down. Instead, he went ahead and replied, I am a man. I did what I can, because that's what men do. And, do you think that I am the one who requested for the marriage? If possible, I would have definitely not wanted to get married, ever. But simply because my old man wanted me to get married, there was nothing that I could do. But do you know about my tastes? I always go for the pure girls, not just some random WH-res. How dare you? You dare to call my niece a WH-re? Believe me, I don't care whether you are a part of the Smith family or not. If you dare to say such sh*t again about my niece, I'm definitely going to beat you up, Collins retorted angrily. Had it not been for the fact that he was still rational enough not to go physical, he would have already beaten up Eugene. It was also at this moment that Eugene finally came back to his senses. Although he was still angered, he was still rational enough to consider the fact that he was actually looking forward to marrying Seline. For that reason, he simply snorted before turning away and departing. Reuben and his 3 bodyguards followed him. Collins, on the other hand, looked at their departing backs silently. At the same time, his aide, who was someone who had grown up with him and Bruce, came to him and patted his back. Although it was true that Collins possessed a higher status as compared to him, the two of them were good friends. And for that reason, during unofficial businesses, they would act like how buddies do. You know that the family is depending on something to happen after the cooperation. But now that you have shouted at that young master, I'm definitely sure that he might change his mind and decide to go against the agreement, the man spoke. Collins took a deep breath as he tried to calm down his anger. Still, he went ahead and replied, I know what I am doing. As a hedonistic young master, I am sure that he has already fallen for Seline. And for that reason, there is no way that he is going to agree for the marriage to be cancelled. In fact, he is going to look for ways that he is going to speed up things. Collins had acted within his bounds, and although he had been harsh, he was sure that there was no way that Eugene was going to cancel the marriage. To be able to get a beautiful lady like Seline, that was definitely something that this young master would not give up on. As for the matter of only chasing the pure ones, there was always a first time for everything. The man remained silent after hearing what Collins said. He simply thought that what Collins had said was actually true. Before today, they had already investigated about Eugene. And for that reason, they knew about all the traits that he possessed. This was just a means that they were utilizing to make sure that they could take advantage of him in case they needed to in the future. Collins, on the other hand, was already feeling slightly guilty about the matter. He knew about Eugene, and he knew how he behaved. And for that reason, he had been feeling guilty about forcing his brother's daughter to be married by such a person. He knew that he was going to ruin her future, but there was no way that he was going to prevent the Gravy family from reaching the top, just because of one person. That was the reason as to why he had hardened his heart, and didn't show much in front of his brother. The moment that he had heard Eugene calling Seline a WH-re, he was seriously infuriated. And for that reason, he even wished that he could beat up Eugene. But considering the fact that he was way older than Eugene, and by using physical attacks on him, he might actually strain the relationship between the two families, he managed to control himself. I think you should take a look at. You are still worried about your brother. The man spoke once again as the group was progressing towards the area where they had left the cars. Walter, you should know that Bruce is my only brother, and for that reason, the two of us have always depended on each other. Even if I am angry, and even if I want to get something, I will have to get worried about my younger brother. Collins sighed as he replied. And if I had another choice, I would have definitely prevented the marriage from occurring. But I'm only going to make sure that I take advantage of things. If I decide to support Bruce, there is someone else that is going to take my place. And if I allow any other person in the family to take care of the matter, then I might as well be removed from the position of the future family head. At least, I believe that I am the gentlest person to handle the matter. If it was anyone else, I'm sure that they would have already utilized several cruel methods to deal with the matter. Walter also knew about this fact. He had been staying in the Gravy family for way too long now. And for that reason, he understood how things were in the Gravy family. He knew that, although it was true that Collins had already taken the lead, and was considered the future leader of the family, that position could be easily changed. As long as there was someone that appeared to be more reliable than him, and that person possessed greater capabilities, then, Collins would definitely be denied the position. And, the main reason as to why he had been sent over to deal with this matter was simply because, this was considered a test to him. They wanted to know whether he would prioritize the relationship that he shared with his brother or the family. Of course, if there was another person that could be replaced, Collins would have done that already. But, he had come to find out that, all the girls of the same age as Seline that had not yet been engaged to someone, none of them was as beautiful as her. For that reason, to make sure that the plan worked, then they had to keep the marriage agreement going on. After all, it was not just a matter of Seline being beautiful, but, she was also part of the marriage agreement that had been made long ago. After getting into the car, the group drove off. Currently, they were also staying in the Glaze Hotel. Due to the fact that the Glaze Hotel was currently the monopoly of the hotel industry present in the country, they thought that people of their status were supposed to stay in such a hotel. Although they were staying in the Glaze Hotel, that didn't mean that they were actually staying in the same hotel as Eugene. Due to the fact that the Glaze Hotel had already become a monopoly, it had already spread several branches within the capital city. And for that reason, all the branches that had been opened recently were all luxurious. There was actually no difference between them, other than the fact that only the main hotel was the biggest and grandest. FCK, had it not been for the fact that I have been slightly attracted by her, I would have definitely asked my father to cancel this stupid marriage agreement. The moment that Eugene got back to his room, he began shouting angrily. I'm sure that father won't care whether disagreement was made several decades ago, as long as I am not happy with it, I'm sure that he would go to an extent of canceling it. Ruben and the 3 bodyguards all stood to the side, as they watched as Eugene continued raging. They had already gotten used to such a behavior from Eugene the moment that he was angered. None of them tried to stop him, considering that this was the method that he was using to control the blood pressure. As long as he vented the anger within his heart, the chances of him fainting were going to be lowered. Ruben, immediately inform my special private team to come over. I don't care about this marriage anymore. I don't care whether the Gravy family is supposed to take her back for the marriage. This time, I must get what I want. After more than 30 minutes of venting, Eugene sat on his bed, as he looked at Ruben before instructing. I will do that immediately. Although Ruben was startled, he knew that he had to do what Eugene had said. Since Eugene had already come to a decision, there was no way that he was going to change it. After having a small chat with his in-laws, Jack and Seline both left. Jack had decided that he was supposed to deal with the matter as soon as possible, to prevent any future troubles from arising. As he left, he informed Denali to begin researching about the Smith family, and apart from that, she had to find the information about the Gravy family. Since these families were reclusive, unless Jack actively looked for information about them, there was no way that he was going to know about their existence that easily. But even so, as long as either Jack or Denali decided to look for information about these people, there was not much that could be hidden from them. A few days later, Bruce was still present in his home. He had been wondering why his brother had not been making a move during the past few days, and that had already made him restless. If it was true that his brother had gone back to Summer City, to let his father take over the situation, then, he knew that he was going to be facing something bigger. It won't be just a matter of his daughter getting married, but it would also be a matter of him not following the family rules and traditions. At this moment, Collins, who had disappeared for 2 days, finally appeared once again. This time, his expression was calm, and like how angry he was when he left. As usual, Bruce welcomed him. At this moment, he was the only person present, as both Seline and her mother had gone to deal with their businesses. As for him, on that day, he did not have anything specific to do, so, he decided to stay at home. What brought you here today? Bruce asked after he had served his brother with a drink. Although the two of them currently were not on the same side concerning Celine's matter, the relationship between the two of them had not been affected that much. Sigh. You should already know the reason as to why I have come back. It is still concerning the matter of your daughter's marriage. Collins released a sigh as he replied. Bruce, on the other hand, although he was expecting the response from his brother, he remained silent, as if the response that he had received had not been heard by him. When Collins saw this, he could only shake his head. After all, he knew how stubborn his brother was. At this moment, He had come over to make sure that what brought him to Cartu City was completed. Otherwise, there was no way that he was going to go back to Summer City without completing it. Alright, I already know that this is something that you don't want to happen to your daughter. But, you should know that we don't have any other choice than this. Collins began. Back then, during the time that they were making this agreement, Father agreed with the fact that the one amongst the two of us that will have a daughter first, will be the one that will be supposed to make sure that the marriage agreement is carried out. Till this day, I only have 2 sons, and I don't have a daughter. But you on the other hand, you have already gotten a daughter, and they gave her 20 years to make sure that she had matured enough for marriage. Since you had been in the family before you left, you should already know about the situation that the family is in. Without cooperation with the Smith family, most of our businesses are definitely going to suffer. And other than this, there is also another fact that, since the agreement had been made by our grandparents, there is no way that we can break it. And, that is especially so since grandfather is present. You should know that I do care about you, and since I do care about you, I will definitely care about your daughter. But, you should know that even if I didn't come, there is someone else that was going to come to make sure that your daughter got married. But, they would have already resorted to extreme means the moment that they arrived. And that is the reason as to why I agreed on the mission given by Father. Bruce listened to his brother, not making a comment about what he was saying. He knew that the majority of what Collins was saying was actually the truth. Although it was true that he had stayed away from home for over 2 decades now, that didn't mean that he wasn't catching up with the things that were happening in the family. I think you should take a look at. Alright, let me get straight to the point this time. The reason as to why I came over today, is to try to convince you once again that, you will have to allow your daughter to get married to the Smith family. When he saw that his brother was not responding, Collins decided to stop beating around the bush. We can make simple arrangements. Your daughter is so beautiful, and I'm sure that she can easily captivate Eugene. And for that reason, it won't be something difficult for her to control him. Once she has him under her control, life will definitely not be difficult for her. At this point, Bruce finally began speaking. Brother, I can understand all that you are saying. But you have to know, even though it is true that I do owe a lot to the family, and it is true that I also care about the development of the family, you have to know that I am a father before all of this. And as a father, there is no way that I am going to allow my daughter to have her future ruined. I have already done my investigation, and have gotten all information about Eugene. Sigh. Perhaps had it been another person, then I might have considered the matter. But still, there is no way that I am going to break the engagement that has already happened. My daughter is already happy with what she has, and I hope that you don't try taking it away from her. At this moment, Collins felt his heart go cold. At the same time, his previously gentle expression suddenly stiffened. He looked at Bruce with disbelief clear in his eyes. He couldn't believe that the strategy that he had been trying to use this time wasn't going to work. He had always been doing something like this during the time that they were growing up, and it had always worked. He couldn't help but wonder what changed. Okay then, I won't force you, but you should know that I am not the only person that came over for Seline. And for that reason, you have to be careful, because that hedonistic young master is definitely going to make a move soon. Collins stated dejectedly before leaving. Bruce on the other hand watched his brother as he left, silently thinking about what he was supposed to do. At the same time, he couldn't help but blame himself for not rejecting the proposition that had been made several years ago. Had it not been for the fact that, at that time, he thought that it was going to be his honor to have his daughter married, and do something important for the family. But once he became a father, he realized that this was not an honor at all. Due to the love that he possessed for his daughter, he knew that this was going to ruin her completely. He had observed at the time that his daughter was so cold, and he didn't even know the reason as to why she behaved in such a manner. He had tried looking for many means to melt her heart, but none of them succeeded. He had tried asking his wife about it, but she always kept it as a secret. She always said that she would tell him after a few years. But surprisingly, till this date, she had not told him anything. But what he was happy about was the fact that his daughter's cold personality had already been melted. Now, she smiled more often. And the reason behind that was simply because she had gotten together with Jack. Since Jack was her source of happiness, there was no way that Bruce was going to take it away from her. He didn't want to see his daughter go back to the previous cold personality. In the end, he could only shake his head, as he stared at the door. I'm sorry, brother. I know that you don't have a choice at this moment, but so do I for my daughter's happiness. I don't have a choice but to go against you. During the past 2 days, Jack had been inside his villa, writing scripts and new songs for the artists of the Rose Entertainment Company. But during this time, he had already begun making arrangements on how to deal with the two families. Currently, with the abilities that he possessed, it wasn't anything difficult for him to deal with them. And within the past 2 days, Jack had been receiving some information about several attempted kidnappings and so on. Yes, they were attempted, as they did not succeed. With Samantha being present, she was able to make sure that Seline was not going to fall into harm's way. As for any other people that he thought of as important for him, all of them were protected by some of the 99 puppets. With their strength, it wasn't difficult to ensure their safety. Okay then. It is finally time for me to deal with this family. They have been getting on my nerves these past 2 days. Jack stated as he got onto his feet. Although he was not worried about any person that he cared about getting harmed, the repeated provocations that he was receiving had already irritated him. For that reason, he had to deal with the fly that was the cause of all of this.